Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Dennis Stedman, and welcome to the Lower Makefield Farmland Preservation Incorporated Board meeting. We have four of our five directors present. I'm filling in for Mike Blank, our president, who is traveling today. And also with us is John Lewis, our Board of Supervisors liaison. So I'd like to call this meeting to order. Uh, we and I'll bring up the agenda if you'll bear with my awkward skills in sharing a screen, and we can get started. Okay, hang on. All right, everyone can see that?
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you. So having called to order, I'll turn the meeting over to George Hines, our secretary, for approval of the minutes of the last meeting.
Great. Thank you, Dennis. We have finalized the meeting minutes from our March 21st meeting. They've been circulated to the board and all comments have been addressed. So I'd like to hear a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the March 21st meeting.
So moved.
Seconded.
There was one there.
I'll take second, and you can have the motion.
Thank you. I didn't
Okay.
know.
So having seconded the motion or the motion, all in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, so the meeting minutes from our March 21st meeting are approved.
Thank you, George. Appreciate that. I'll turn it over to Dan Benkowski for our treasurer's report.
So not too much activity. We have one invoice pending that I haven't mailed out a check yet for Corcoran for $500. That is the last invoice then of the winter work. Right, Sean? That should be the last one, right?
Right. Yes.
And that using up all the remaining hours. And in honor of tax day today, just let you know that our returns are extended, and then but we should be in pretty good shape to not have to have them extended to as late as what they've been in the past, hopefully.
Okay.
Then lastly, perhaps as either a May or June agenda item, how about we put on there one of those two? Let's do a more thorough investment touch point, performance, where we're at, et cetera. We'll probably then be approaching 6 months at that point.
When you say touch point, Dan, what are we talking about specifically?
We'll go through our specific asset allocation and performance of our investment portfolio.
Okay.
Okay. And does anyone have handy when the last time we did that? The date, it would not have been December.
It might be October, November, though.
Okay.
And then, because we talked about our the criteria for our asset allocation that Fidelity recommended, which was, I think, late last year.
Okay. Dan, if it works for you, if we check the minutes, if it was in fact October, then the 6 months, the threshold would be now. So we'll shoot for May, and so that we don't miss that date by too much. So let's just presume May for today, if that's going to work with your schedule, Dan.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, great. Other items, Dan?
It was November.
It was, okay.
Nothing else.
Very good, very good. Repeat, very much appreciate that. The fourth agenda item, individual property issues or updates. I did not list any specific items here, but wanted to just poll the directors for any updates on properties that are appropriate since last meeting. Any comments? I have one, but let's see what others there are.
I have one as well, but I need a second to just pull up the address. So if you want to go first, that'd be good.
Okay,
Dennis,
Sean, you look like
it's
you have
Sean.
something?
I've got two. Again, I'm just doing the same thing that Dan is. I'm pulling up addresses. So, 2080 Farmview Drive. So if you recall, I'm noticing there's kind of a pattern here. So one of our winter projects was to have some work done on Leadham's farm down at the end of Farmview, where we did work. I don't know, call it like 2084 Farmview all the way down to the corner lot, which would be 2092 Farmview. So about 150 yard stretch where we had work done. We had the fence cleared, we had dead trees removed, so on. After that was finished, we received a message from the township that the resident from 2080 Farmview had contacted them about work being done at their house. I went down, met with the residents. They had a very easy request about, ultimately what happens is you work on one area and you get it clean, and then something that wasn't a priority now looks like it probably should have been a priority because that area is now left untouched. So it was kind of one of those things where you did this to the neighbors and so on. We'd like it done behind our home. They were very clear with what they'd like done. We had some time with Corcoran left. Corcoran came back out, cleared it all out, so on. We actually had a tree taken care of at the same time. So all done. And then the only reason that it stretches over into this meeting is I did reach back out to them just to make sure that they were perfectly happy with the work that was done. They kind of signed off on it, so to say, and they did. So that property completely cleared. I don't have any issues on the Leadham's farm. In George's absence, recently, I do walk the Stackhouse farm because of my proximity to it. And, Stackhouse has a couple of issues, but in particular, 1578 Stackhouse had a tree that had a Y in it, a large mature tree, had a Y in it. It had snapped. Part of it had fallen into our buffer area. It was about to fall into our buffer area. It was being held up by another tree, which is always a very dangerous situation. I snapped pictures of it, sent it to the board, also sent it to Corcoran. And unfortunately, instead of having some proactive work done over on Farmview that we wanted to have done, limbing up trees, we spent our last half a day of winter work getting this tree down. And not just this tree down, but then the neighbor at 1574 Brookfield has thrown a large amount of debris over the fence line. I know it's a later topic, so I won't harp on it, but all of that debris being thrown over, we decided to work that into the same project as 1578 Brookfield. While they were there taking that tree down, we had the debris removed at our expense. Now, the only other follow-up item is a few days later at 1578 Brookfield, I received a phone call from the resident asking if I could come out and look at their property with them. And as I did, they expressed a lot of concerns about, here are trees that begin on your property, grow over onto our property, drop limbs, so on and so forth. So, we had a conversation around, like we usually do, draw an invisible line up from the fence. If there's anything you want to have limbed off, you have our full permission. Anything that's stretching into your property, have done, so on. So we had that conversation as far as, cleaning up. And I've also marked that area off as something that maybe we want to come back to in the winter as a project. It's not a priority item, but it's something that, if we have time, we can come back to. So I'll leave it there because I know we're going to get into a deeper conversation on a similar topic, but for now I'll just leave it there. But I do want those two addresses, highlighted, as places that we stopped out this month to look at.
And I also think, Sean, based off of you and I texting back and forth while I was still in Florida, we agreed that later this week or early next week, you and I were going to walk over there so you could reacquaint me with everything there. And so I'll be up to date. So whatever we have to do, we can take care of.
Sounds good. I look forward to it, George.
Very good. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah.
Dan, are you ready to
Yeah.
give a report?
So actually I'll need Sean's assistance here too. At Farmview 1, 1777 Greenbrier Court, there was some debris over the fence there. And Sean, we didn't actually connect. I had assumed when you had said you drove down in there then that you did actually get a chance to pick that up. Is that right?
Yeah, I didn't, Dan.
Okay.
For two reasons. It was a little bit greater than I had time to accomplish. So if I was going to do it, I was going to do it all at once. Number two, I'm doing it with my own civilian truck that, I paid for, and I'm kind of a little, cautious with. And when I saw all of that, I just kept seeing, oh no, this is bigger than maybe I thought in the beginning, right, without cutting it up smaller. So it was a little bigger of a pile than I had thought. Okay. So I didn't attempt it at the time. I have pictures of it. We'll get to it. But it also might be something that Corcoran is better in place to take out. He doesn't care about scratches as much as I might.
So we can chat about it a little bit more, but basically I think we have a similar case of some, I think it's pretty clear, trees that are on our side of the property, neighbor cut branches that I'm sure were hanging on their side of the property, and then took the liberty to throw all those branches over the fence on our side of the property. Mm-hmm. And we did not have a conversation with that neighbor at all as of this point in time. That we also spoke with the neighbor, that direct neighbor there at 1775 Greenbrier Court. No actions coming out of that other than, he was looking at potentially some cleanup, and that neighbor there is gonna work on probably trimming up some branches and trees and stuff. And again, Sean had a conversation with another neighbor over near him, talked about, hey, you can cut this stuff that's overhanging. You don't need our permission. If you need something more than that, let's chat and we can go from there about what we need to do.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you.
Dennis, I think I'll add one thing real quick. It seems like the letter that we have been sending out is getting to certain neighbors, which is a great thing. Some neighbors that I speak to, it doesn't get to them. But some of the neighbors that it is getting to lets them know who we are and what we do. The neighbor, for instance, that Dan and I met with down at 1775 Greenbrier mentioned the letter and loved to know who we are. And it's not just a farm, but there are people that are in charge there of the buffer area. And it seems like there's a decent amount of neighbors out there who would like to see the back of the property line cleaner than it currently is. But they all also acknowledge that it looks a lot better than it used to. And now that they're seeing the farm, maybe they want to see it a little bit clearer. So I think maybe in our future discussion we go a little deeper on being able to give people permission to, hey, if you want to talk to us about making it a clearer property. I mean, it's how I became familiar with you all and how I became a member of the board. There are things that we can do, but please have a conversation with us. Let's be in dialogue. Let's just not go jumping over the fence, cutting things down that don't belong to us, or hiring someone to do that. But let's have a dialogue and then go about it the right way. And I think that's happening. So I think that is a great product of the letter that we're putting out to introduce ourselves to neighbors continuously. And we need to keep doing that, even though there is a cost associated with it. I think that it's working.
Yeah. And that's consistent with my experience. I run into neighbors on my walks that clearly have read the letter or are familiar with it and engaged and understand the circumstance. And then others that, for whatever reason, have no idea whether they got pitched as junk mail or they forgot or who knows what.
Right.
Just in terms of individual issues, I was contacted by a property owner, and George, this is one at Bridal Estates that
Right.
I want to turn over to you. This is an old issue that came up in November of 21. I went out there, and the address is 1201 Bridal Estates. Very nice neighbor, Gary Leedon, Ledonne. And he wrote to me saying we addressed the issue. The issue back a year and a half ago was deer damaging the fence. His property happens to be kind of on a deer trail between properties, and deer were jumping his fence. Young deer were getting caught in the fence. It was torn up. It was kind of, there was a specific section that was just a mess, and they were having trouble with it. So my suggested solution at the time was I went out and I removed that an 8-foot section of fence. I cut the wire. I bent the wires around the tube, around the post on each side, and said maybe you'd be better off with just an opening here if you're comfortable with it. And they were, and we agreed. Let's try that approach. It might be less of an issue. Well, he said now instead of a trail of deer, he seems to have a super highway of deer there, and it's become quite a thoroughfare. So he reached out to say, that the solution we tried doesn't seem to be working very well. Let's talk about something else. So if you could, George, I will give you his name and number offline, and maybe you could reach out to Gary and
Sure.
and go out, visit the site and see what might make sense.
I can do that.
It is a bit of a perplexing one. I have to tell you.
Dennis, it sounds like we
Hunting
created
blind
a deer
there
run.
for
Say again?
Boma.
What's that?
I said, can we offer a hunting blind there for Boma?
Well, it's not exactly that kind of location, and yeah, the fence is generally beat up there, and it was kind of buried behind some sheds and things. You need to see it to understand it, George. I'll be happy to help you with that if you want me to go out with you or get involved. But that's the nature of it, and he's a very good neighbor. He's patient. He's just saying let's see if there's another approach we could take.
Called taller fence.
And well, it would have to be across his entire property. Then I mean they'll just
We'll do
just
it.
move on.
I'll catch up with you, Dennis, and then I'll
Yeah.
go out there and take a peek, and we can figure something out.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Any other specific
Yeah.
property issues?
Why don't we talk about Longshore here for a sec? And John sent this picture here a little bit ago of the sign on that property at Longshore. So this is over near the corner of Woodside Road and Merrick Road, right, John? I think that's where that sign sits.
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And this is that sign that says Lower Makefield Farmland Preservation in honor of Hoopt. I don't know my last name. Hoopt Farm.
Out, I think. Yeah.
Helped.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sign's bothered me for some time.
Yeah, looking a little rough, right?
Well, and if you look more closely at the top of each post is a screw sticking straight up because there was a decorative ball on the top of each one of those posts as well. It's in person, it's more beat up than the picture does justice to it. It's already not good in the picture. I don't know, I don't know if anyone knows the history of that sign. It's unique. It's not on any of the other, that type of sign isn't on any of the other properties. Do we have some?
I I do know I have maybe part of the history. Um, I think that was one of these few original signs. I think then there was this idea of when Mike Blank joined the board. I think it was one of Mike's first tasks that he went through this process of coming up with a better design for signs and signage and what should be appropriate. That is what then developed into what the current signage that we use that's hanging. And that was then I think even the township used that same format on a couple other locations then too.
Right.
But I think that was Mike's doing, that he developed all that. And then, but I think that sign was obviously, that's there is a much older sign, older format. Nothing else has been done with that for, I think, many, many years.
But and clearly, but this is in particular in recognition of her dedication for service, to a specific individual. So it's obviously above and beyond just the sign that says this is farmland, preserved farmland.
Yeah. So why it was decided to do that specifically for him, though, I am not actually hearing something else.
So I guess my question is, what's the issue? Does the sign need to be restored a little bit?
That is the issue, correct?
Okay, so let's focus on that and not so much the history.
Well, but to me, you can't separate them, because I'm not, because it's unique, and I'm not sure how much time and energy and money we want to spend, repainting or building a new sign, unless we know the role of the sign and is it necessary? Is that the type of sign we should have? If it is necessary, a wooden sign like this that deteriorates, is that the best thing to do? I just don't want to repeat duplicate what's there out of sheer rote. It seems to me like it would be a waste of money. I know the township guys that cut that grass, do a pretty good job of whacking up those posts with the weed whackers. They get chewed up pretty bad, because that's along Woodside Road, where I spent way too much time removing stuffed animals from that row of sycamore trees here a couple of years ago after the pandemic, and caused my orthopedic surgeon, gave my orthopedic shoulder guy some revenue. But so before we just replace it or improve it, it seems to me we should decide do we want this sign, and what are the obligations or associated with it.
But it looks like in 2004, the Farmland Board voted to name this farm in his honor. That's all I really see.
Well, I think that I would vote to approve that if in the future you're going to name a farm in my name, under my honor, then I would joke. Okay. John, I know this has been in that condition for a while. There's a part of me that says, could we table this subject until Michael Blank is back? Because I think he's got firsthand knowledge of all this stuff.
Yeah, by all means. So I walk around a lot near farmland preservation property, so I see stuff occasionally.
Right.
So that's what pops into my head. So I'll keep seeing stuff. It doesn't have to be addressed immediately. That one just seemed like, and because I've been walking by it so many times, I'm like,
yeah.
But that's fine. And also, Mike probably has the institutional memory because he's been on the board a lot longer, and so he may know a little bit more. I just sent you the the meeting minutes were from 2004, but
Okay.
And
Okay.
Dennis, where I was coming from was basically back in 2004, obviously people then thought it was important to honor this person.
Right.
So I wouldn't want to somehow shortchange that or change that piece of it. But to me, the conversation is, okay, do we go to a different style sign that still recognizes this person and basically captures the same thing that is more in line with our current signage or whatever it is, and therefore it has better longevity and
Mhm.
we don't have to go as extensive. So the question is, if you were to refurbish the sign as is, what's its cost versus just getting a new sign more in line with our current
Right.
standards that still captures the same wording and stuff like that, and what's its cost, and then decide which is a better route to take.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that approach completely.
Yeah, there's a guy out in Doylestown that I think we worked with to make those signs.
Okay.
Yeah, was out there. He's very cooperative. I can't think of his name right now, but uh, yeah, he does them for all the township. So, all right, what do you think, board? Should we just
Perfect.
put this on an
Yep.
agenda once Mike returns?
Perfect.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm good with that.
Okay, cool. That's great. Thanks, John. Keep observing. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all.
and am I free to remove a remaining stuffed animal from a tree?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, let's
Bring some pliers or something with you to try to pull out whatever staple might have
Yeah.
stuck in with it though.
yeah, you need staple pullers. That was the spirit behind the please respect our trees sign, which turned out to be way too small and way too flimsy to withstand the test of time. Let me reshare the screen here. The under item 5, we want to talk about a potential new approach to address the dumping, typically of yard waste by neighbors. And I also put on the agenda potentially a new approach to fencing, which came up at last meeting. That's premature. I agree, Sean. Let's hold that for a future date when we have it better fleshed out. But if it's good with all, let's go ahead and talk about this dumping issue. And to do that, I'm going to bring up another document, kind of a thoughts for discussion. Just to give it a little structure. Way too often, it doesn't happen a lot, but it happens way too often that neighbors, in cleaning up their own yards or tree limbs or whatever, look at the seemingly vacant land behind them and simply dump their yard waste, tree limbs, grass clippings, old flower pots, dirt, whatever, over the fence. That it's been a certainly it costs us money. We have done, I think, in the last couple of years, a much better job of cleaning up and managing our buffers, and of course this interferes with that, and it just gets it becomes a problem, and either Sean or Dan or one of us are trying to pick up the material, or we're hiring someone to clear it. And so what we said kind of amongst ourselves is the occasional letter doesn't seem to reach everyone and cause a halt to that. So what we wanted to do is discuss some approaches here, and that was the spirit of kind of laying out some of these thoughts, which I know we circulated this document. I know when I'm walking the property and I've seen that, there's nothing to stop me other than my own my own reluctance to go knock on the door and talk to the neighbor about it. So my thought, or a thought, is to draft a standard letter or postcard that we can put in the mailbox, because oftentimes people aren't home when we're out there, and address the issue, and inform them that, you know, they can't do that. Unfortunately, it's no trespassing. We don't want to invite neighbors to climb over the fence and clean it up themselves. I think that would be a problem and a potential liability. And who's going to drive around to wherever they have to get on the other side of the fence properly versus damage a fence and climb over it. And so a thought is to just send the neighbor a bill for the cleanup. And that's, we've all looked at this. I just want to toss it open for discussion. It's not a presentation. It's what are some thoughts and reactions here from the board as to the best way to try to address this issue.
Dennis, I'm happy to start. I mean, I when I go out and walk the properties, I kind of take it personally when I come across this, because I've spent a lot of my time on the board, trying to help clean up the buffers and make it, prettier behind, people's homes, something that they'd be happy, to look out on. At the outset, you mentioned neighbors. I'd also add to the fact that it may not just always be neighbors, it may be hired landscapers as well that we may be missing. I do have reason to believe that there could be some hired help out there that is, sees this as kind of a faceless piece of property behind the fence and goes ahead and tosses certain things as opposed to taking it away, because they may not have the, ability to dump somewhere. I think that's kind of become an issue. Some of these landscaping companies, when dumping was free in different places or very cheap, I think they were much more likely to load things on their trailers or in their trucks and take it out, where, now that places, charge a fee, I think we're seeing more. But at the end of the day, I don't know exactly how to handle it. I mean, every time I walk it, it's everything inside of me to not take the stuff and start throwing it back over the fence, because it's exactly what's been done to us. Whether it's a sign, whether we as a board purchase, say, a half dozen no dumping signs that are quite ugly in color and size, and place them on the other side of the fence that face the property to kind of make a statement that we are here, we do see this, it's not allowed, we're picking it up, type of thing, or it's something that goes in the mailbox. I just wonder, how much teeth it has when we put something in the mailbox about a fine or about charging them. I mean, if they pay versus don't pay, I mean, at the end of the day, if we're charged X amount of dollars, we're charged X amount of dollars. If the resident pays, great. If they don't, I don't know what type of teeth it actually has. So, I wonder about that. But at the end of the day, each time we do this, it costs us money, because either our contractor is spending time there doing it instead of doing projects we have listed, or they're doing it and invoicing us, as we've seen recently. So, coming to some type of of an agreeable, protocol for what we do, I think is important. I'd be in favor of the board ordering signs that say no dumping on them. I don't think they should be pretty in color. I think they should be rather loud, quite honestly. And when we find large piles that need to be dealt with, we put them in the ground and they face the resident's home, and we have it picked up, and we have a bill sent to the home. And, it's kind of a statement that way. I've noticed in my short time on the board that a lot of the places are repeat offenders. I get a message, hey, there's dumping on the fence here, we're picking it up. I get pictures of it. We take care of it. 6 months later, a year later, same stuff thrown back over the fence in the same exact area. So whether it's neighbors our hired landscapers, I know we did put a line in our most recent letter about, whether it's you that takes care of your lawn or you hire help, please make sure everyone's aware not to throw it over the fence. I just think we need to do something, because each time it's on us and it's taking away from our progress on the fence line and the buffer area, certainly.
Dan, George, some
Well,
thoughts?
having listened to that, and I've walked the property and I've seen it, so I agree. But I try to put my hat on and say, okay, so if we put up some signs, it may or may not help. But what might help is if we get, and I don't have no color in mind when I say this or how gaudy it looks or whatever it is, but you almost think that each individual household that borders our property, basically on the fence line, should have a sign centered on the fence facing them with some wording that says no dumping allowed, private property, etc. And that way, nobody could ever argue that they didn't get a letter or they didn't know that it was private property and they couldn't dump. Now, the sign may only have to be, I don't know, 8 inches by 6 inches or something like that, and we affix it to the fence immediately in the middle of their yard, so it's facing them, so not one house along any of the fence lines can argue that they're not aware that dumping is not allowed. Now, I don't know what that would cost, but if you try to space signs out, you'll always get a homeowner that'll say, well, I didn't see the sign or I didn't get the letter. So to me, the root cause, if not knowing is one of the major root causes, we almost have to assume that every house along the border of our properties needs to have some sort of little 8x6 sign on our fence line facing them, centered in the middle of the yard, so they can't argue that they don't know.
George, I mean, as a neighbor who lives on the farm, I'd say a couple of things. Number one, I think the number I know in my head is we have something like 270 neighbors. Let's just say at a rough estimate, these signs are $10 a piece, plus man time and all of that. We're looking at like a $3,000 bill to ultimately probably put signs on 20 offenders, 25 known offenders, fences. And I can tell you, as a neighbor who lives on the farm, I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want that facing my property on any given day. I wouldn't throw anything over the fence, period. So, I wouldn't vote to have something like that facing the back of my yard as a reminder of what not to do. I mean, I think we're after a specific, want and need here. And as these things come to us, we address them. But boy, I'd hate to go out and try and address 270 neighbors for this when, let's call it 25-ish, are where we have addresses that are consistently dumping over the fence. That's just my opinion as a neighbor.
And I understand that, Sean. And if that's the case, and I understand the rationale behind that, then basically what we have to accept then is that we are always going to be in a reactive mode. That 20 or 25 people over time will, cross the line literally and cause a problem that we're going to have to address. So if we don't want to be completely proactive and try to cut it off ahead of time, then we just have to accept that a small percentage of these occurrences will occur. And then you would put in place a procedure or policy that deals with exceptions.
Yeah, I'd be more in favor of B, unfortunately, as opposed to being proactive, being reactive to those that are doing it and dealing with them. But I also feel strongly about somehow getting in touch with some of the large lawn care businesses in this area. And we know who they are. I know very well who they are. But in speaking with neighbors, they've used the same name multiple times of, well, maybe I shouldn't have done this, but I had them remove that tree over there and they did it, type of thing. I think that some of the larger landscape companies that are here in Pensfield, over on Stackhouse, across the street, so on, should be aware that, listen, this is private property on the other side of the fence. If the homeowner is asking you to limb things that are coming to their yard, that's one thing. If they're asking you to remove a tree or something, that's something that, we kind of need to, to talk about. Or, if you're taking debris and tossing it over the fence that's come from this property, that's not acceptable. I almost think that, we've done a lot of work sending letters to neighbors, but let's be honest, I'm going to throw out a number that 50%, and I think that's probably low, but 50% of the neighbors that are neighboring these farms probably aren't caring for their own property.
Dan?
So when this first came out and I saw your note, Dennis, about the signs, I immediately thought that was a good idea. I was also thinking along the same lines of you, Sean, that yes, reactive, and this is a sign that goes up when there's a known issue. It's not one that is, behind every single property, but it's ugly, bold, obnoxious, and it goes up behind properties where there's a known issue. I like that idea. It doesn't need to be there forever, right?
No.
And if we buy, a dozen, and we got the posts on them and ready to go, and you move them around every so often, and this one, it hasn't been an issue, and maybe we try to, keep down a kind of a date or something like that, and or kind of a list where the signs are, and hopefully after some period of time we move it to some other location, or we put it in the garage for a little period of time or something like that. But I don't think this needs to be necessarily like a permanent sign that goes up behind there forever.
Right.
Because it is going to be ugly.
Yeah. Dan, to your point, I thought about it. And if we had 6 of these, like at any given time in my time on the board, if we had 6 of these, what would happen is they go in the ground on these places where either Corcoran contacted us and there's dumping going on here, or we spotted it. And then ultimately they'd be rotated to the point where they'd be there for a couple of months. They'd come out of the ground. If they did it again, one would come back. But if we had a half a dozen of these on posts, like you said, I think they kind of rotate in a manner that they'd be there, they wouldn't be there, type of thing, which I think is good. I also think that we can use township help and support here as well. Like, we've sent certain instances off to the township, to Mike Kirk, to be specific about what can you do to help us here. Here are pictures of, blatant dumping on our property, blatant disregard for the property line. I realize it's not his job, and he's not going to be dedicated to just that by any means. But, I think in certain instances that we can use some township help here in, if nothing else, making the resident aware the township is kind of behind this, period. Don't do it again.
Yeah. So because I think Dennis, or Sean, you had mentioned that there may have been some conversations there. Because I was not a part of or know any of the outcome of any of those conversations as it relates to dumping, as it relates to bamboo conversations, sure. But so is there any like success stories here or anything like that of working with the township, or did any of those situations ever get that far?
Well, I don't think they really got that far. I mean, in the case of bamboo, there's a township ordinance, and Mike is enforcing the ordinance and can levy a fine. In the case of someone dumping onto non-township property, in essence, private property, I don't think I'm putting words in Mike's mouth, but I don't think he sees himself as being able to, cite an ordinance and say, and therefore here's your dollar fine, right? He's kind of making stuff up. So, I too like the idea of the sign. However, I really don't like the idea of an obnoxious sign on a first offense or until there's been a dialogue. I think I mean, I think of the instance that we had at Makefield Brook, where not only did someone dump things over the fence, they went into the buffer and dug up, the top 8 inches of topsoil in a 10-foot radius and for their garden, you know. And when I went and knocked on that, this is a couple of years ago, when I knocked on that door and explained to the homeowner the circumstance, he, I thought he was going to do penance right before me. I mean, he felt so bad. He didn't really understand, appreciate, or think about it. He put the dirt back. He cleaned up his side of the fence. I've since seen him a couple times with tree issues. He's the best neighbor ever, right? So, I wouldn't want to start the dialogue on dumping with, oh, by the way, here's a fluorescent orange sign. I To me, it feels, unless it's a repeat offender, that's a different circumstance. But if someone's dumping, I think they deserve the benefit of the doubt, where there's a civil dialogue that says, hey, here's our name and number. That's not allowed. That's going to cost us money. Please don't do that again. We're going to send you the bill, and because we don't have any other choice. And if 50% of the people actually pay the bill, great. But because the sign to me feels punitive, and I know would feel good for those of us frustrated by it. But I want to give a neighbor a benefit of the doubt first. And then if they don't respond correctly, then yeah, absolutely put up the sign as an educational, get their attention measure, but not as a first step, because the sign doesn't clear it, and it doesn't take our costs away. It doesn't, it just kind of yelling at the neighbor, and that's good. Some of them need yelling at, but I'd rather collect a little money first if we think there's a chance to pay for the damage that they've created. That's my philosophy, if you will.
I was going to suggest that perhaps we have a policy of prompt corrective action where there are multiple stages, that we say, okay, first notice offense, right? First time we see somebody dumping, we send a letter, explain to them that they have 72 hours to rectify or clean this up, right? Or it'll be turned over to code enforcement. There is a township code that specifically suggests that open lands maintenance at section 200-77, all open lands must be kept free of litter and debris. And there's the section on that. So if you send somebody a letter and say they get, I don't know, a fixed amount of time to fix it, if they haven't, right, then we can clean it up and give them a bill, give them a week to pay the bill. If they don't pay the bill, then we put the sign up, right? And if they wanted the sign removed, they can pay for the bill plus the cost of the sign, right? And we just set up a series of tiered. So there's one thing I found in this is that we have some folks, no matter how well intentioned our property management codes are, the zoning, they will not abide by the law. They think it's optional. And there are some cases we've had to go to district court over an extended period of time to win, $1,000 or $5,000. But the point is that if you let those folks get away with that, that sets a bad precedence for the rule of law in general. So if you just set up a sort of tiered system that everybody could probably feel comfortable with, hey, this is our prompt corrective action plan. These are the steps. If you pay now, you're not going to have this nasty ass sign. You're not going to have X. And so people know exactly what they're in for, right? And then when a sign does appear, there is shame, hopefully.
Yep.
And
So-
I like the tiered approach. I think that is the kind of the way to do it, to ramp it up depending upon the reaction of the offender. The only exception to the scenario you outlined, John, was we can't ask them to clean it up. We can't ask them to climb onto our property and throw it back over their fence. I mean, that's been our position, because we don't want to invite people onto the property, and then they cut their finger while on our side, handling something that they threw over, and all of a sudden we're kind of in a mess. But that same philosophy, that same approach, to me makes sense.
So Dennis, what I would suggest is, I think this is all good input and background, and I think we have a pretty good idea of where people are coming from. I don't think we can solve it in this forum. I think we need to do this offline. A few of us get together someplace, sit down at a table, and map out or come up with an action plan that we could then present either at the May or June meeting and say, this is the best proposal we have. Do we buy into it? Is it reasonable? And go from there. Trying to solve it at this meeting isn't going to work. Okay.
No, and that's not the goal to solve it tonight. I
Right.
agree, George. It's to get this discussion going, and which we have, and we've heard from everyone, and I think we have some good ideas. I'd be happy to. Is there a board member or two that would like to take the lead on kind of drafting an approach here based on this discussion?
What I'd like to do, Dennis, is maybe you and I, and if there's one other person who has the time, let's just meet offline and we could draft that or discuss what we think is the best way to do it, and then bring it forward.
You're on mute, Dan. Sean, you're on mute.
Sorry. I think I just came off, hopefully. Let me check.
Yeah,
I just came off. I think we're all in this together. I agree that it won't be solved tonight. I think that we should all kind of, figure out a time where we can get together and put our input in. I want everyone's input in this. We all deal with it because we all manage different farms. We all have different settings with how close we are to roads, not roads, neighbors, certain situations. I think we should all have input into this. I think it's important going forward that we handle this the right way. I think we have buffers largely off the table. I think we have bamboo largely off the table. I think dumping onto our properties and the fence line are the next two big issues that we face. And I think we should all be a part of it, quite honestly.
Yeah, and I agree that we should all be a part of it. It's just a question of a kind of a working session. And we can do an offline working session. That's not a problem. I'll just via email. Let's see if we can come up with some common dates for that kind of session. Thank you, George. Thank you, Sean.
Okay.
Given the clock on the wall, I think we should close that item and move on. Is there any other business that anyone wants to bring up before asking for public comment? The only item I would mention, because I informed the board by email that the Environmental Advisory Council has, I know I forwarded it on to everyone, submitted an application, or I'm sorry, a proposal to plant trees on some of our property along Woodside and Dolington. You've all seen that, and we will have on the agenda for next month a representative from the Environmental Advisory Committee to present that. So we'll hold that discussion next month, but just know that that's in the hopper.
And Dennis, that within that proposal, it doesn't seem to address some of the issues that were brought up on the site visit that Jim Majewski was at and I was at with the EAC. It doesn't seem to address some of those issues. So I guess we'll see perhaps at their presentation of how they were thinking about those issues.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Let's hear what they have to say. So at this juncture, I would ask, are there any public comments? Ask our meeting organizer.
There's no public comments online.
No public comments. Very good. No, not very good, but thank you. We always welcome public comments. With that, George, could I ask you to review your notes on action items?
Sure. First one I have is we're going to put our asset allocation / configuration portfolio review on a future meeting, and we were going to target for May. So I guess, Dan, between you and Dennis, agree on that as an agenda item, and we can move forward with it either in May or June, whatever month you think is appropriate.
Okay,
I am going to follow up with Dennis regarding the neighbor at 1201 Bridal Estates. I'll go out there and follow up and see what the situation is, and then we'll talk through what we have to do to try to help keep the deer out of his yard to some extent. Since I have deer in my yard and I'm not even on the fence line, it's almost impossible. So,
well, to be clear, the complaint wasn't deer on his property.
It was the fence.
It started with the fence being damaged by the deer. Yeah.
so we'll do that.
Yep.
Then I think the other item we had was put on the agenda. I think when Mike comes back regarding the HAP sign on Longshore, and try to understand the history and then what we want to do moving forward to either refurbish or replace the sign with something more appropriate that still captures the essence and the wording. And then the fourth item I have is we just need to agree on when we can meet to discuss some good options for this whole dumping issue that we have on the properties. And I think you said, Dennis, you'll send out an email and try to get some dates from us when we can try to get together.
Correct.
And those are the 4 items I have. If I missed anything, somebody feel free to speak up.
No.
Okay.
Hearing none. I really appreciate this board's time and energy. I think we have short meetings. We try to wrap them up in an hour. And it's in part because we spend a lot of time all month on these properties, and I appreciate everyone's willingness and ability to do just that. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I know the buffers have improved and our neighbors' standards are rising in terms of what they expect. And that's a good thing. And Sean, I appreciate your leadership in that regard. At some juncture, as someone who grew up on farm fields and carrying rocks out of fields and onto the perimeters and mowing the grass around the sides and fixing the fences, it is a farm. It's not suburbia. And we'll have to create that correct expectation for our neighbors at some juncture. We can't have the farm side of the fence look like the suburban side of the fence. It never will. It never should. We couldn't afford it. We want it to be attractive. We don't want it to be an eyesore, but there's a balance to be struck there. And I'm sure we'll figure that out. But it's great that the improvements are there and the neighbors are noticing them. I just like that a whole lot. So with that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Very good. All in favor, say aye and good night.
Aye.
Aye.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
John.